right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are in week 3, right? We're getting there. I'm excited. Covering all kinds of really good stuff. So, last week we talked about literacy, obviously, equality, social construct, morality, and assumptions, and how our morality is based on our assumptions of life, right? What we believe to be right and true, which is going to be our morals, and how that affects equality. Okay, and how do these things ultimately, in the end, go? Wow, these beliefs and assumptions I have about life are actually hindering or might be a part of the ways in which we consider people or things equal. Okay, see how those tie in. So, all right, so that was last week. We are going to move forward into this week. I'm going to start out talking about the social self first, and then we're going to go into the vocabulary. And the vocabulary also intertwines all of our readings. So, in the PowerPoint, you're going to see pretty much all the answers to quiz 4 or 3, whatever. What is that quiz? The social self quiz. Sorry, I had them in different orders for last semester or the semester before, so I'm all whoop. So ignore the fact that they're not in order. Just go with it. Okay. So anyway, so we're going to talk about social self first. So to understand others, it's important that we understand ourselves and where we kind of stand in society. And we start to see that more and more as we understand. I remember social construct, like how we see things to be. That's how we actually end up putting ourselves in society. So humans, we're weird. Okay. All right, so social self. We're going to start first with the looking glass self, where it's how we see ourselves based on how others see us. So if when we're talking to people, when they're laughing, we're going to assume then that we are comedians, we're funny, we have that type of personality. If people come to us for advice, we're going, oh, I must be an influencer, and we kind of lean towards that. People commenting on how great you dress, you start to see yourself as like a fashionista or something, right? So weirdly, the looking glass self idea is that we base who we think ourselves to be based on how others see us. Okay, sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not good, right? Next, what I want you to do, and I think you've already seen it because you're going in order of all the things, is to take a look at the NPR video on labeling. And I would actually love it if you paused me and went and watched it from our PowerPoint and then came back to me, and then that way we can have this other next discussion. So go ahead and do that if you haven't already. I'll give you a minute. Okay, we're back. All right, so labeling bias, it's wild how things like just by labeling a person or a thing, we start to have a bias towards it. So when you saw that video about, the scientists and how their labeling of the mice and how the scientist handles said mice absolutely changed the ways in which the mice reacted. What? Right? And how did they react? Oh, you watched the video. Great job. Okay. So that being said, the definition here is when we are labeled and others' views and expectations of us are affected by that labeling, right? So when we're labeled, we then become said label. It's wild how the brain works and how maybe it's the ways in which we communicate together. Verbal language or actual physical nonverbal language could be helping to create that mindset. So labels do create a bias in us. It's human nature. It's what we do. We categorize things so that we can make more sense of it. Okay. Self-labeling. So when we talk about labeling bias, sometimes that can also lead into stereotypes, right? Sometimes we are okay with said stereotypes so that we feel like we fit into things. This is not always the case. There's a lot more to it. I'm not going to get way deep into it, but just understand that labeling does create an identity. So self-labeling is when we adopt others' labels explicitly into our own self-concept, and it depends on the nature of the labels. So when you're in high school and someone labels you the ditzy cheerleader, and you're like, oh, I guess I'm just the ditzy cheerleader, and you kind of go along with it, or the cowboy, or the nerd, or the jock, or whatever, those stereotypical labels. A lot of times we go for it, because we're like, oh, I belong to a thing. I have been labeled. I get it. I accept it. I like being the ditzy cheerleader, or the jock, or the nerd, or the cowboy, or whatever. So we kind of take these on to go, oh, I accept said labels, and it helps us to identify who we are. That is obviously not always good. It is not always bad. This is just the way in which society works. This is how we start to understand one another, because we like to, again, put things in categories so we can make sense of it. And there's a lot of reasons why we want to make sense of things, is because it's chaotic. Being a human is chaotic. All these things. So sometimes what we do is we do this and put ourselves and others into these boxes so that we can just say, okay, I understand. The problem is exactly that. The world's not black and white, and it's not that easy. You cannot label everybody and understand exactly who they are. And we talk about that later on when it comes to saying all such and such are this, or all such and such do that, whether it's a cop or protester or whatever the hell, whatever's the thing of the day. Okay, so anyway, keep that in mind as we move forward. Internalized prejudice is when individuals turn prejudice directed towards them by others onto themselves. So someone else's prejudice, we end up taking it on and accepting it. Lovey idea, I'm an ideal moment right there where she's sitting there, I want to be a Howley. I want to be a Howley. She's putting the prejudice of quote unquote society or whatever she's imagining to be out there on herself. I don't look like that. I must be bad. She now has internalized prejudice against her own self. And when we talk about the book later on, you just see how much self-hate she has. And not just self-hate, culture hate, life hate, everything that her existence, she hates because of this internalized prejudice. Okay. All right. So social comparison. Again, we're bringing Lovey back in to wanting to be this Howley, to want to be able to speak proper English, to not, to be good at math. She's Japanese and she feels like she should be, good at math because of that stereotype, and she's just falling apart. So social comparison is when we learn about our abilities and skills, about the appropriateness and validity of our opinions, and about our relative social status by comparing our own attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors with those of others. And sometimes this is great. Okay, I see where I'm standing. We're on the same. Remember, we talk about assumptions. We're on that same page. We got the same belief. And then all of a sudden, something gets thrown in the works, and you're like, "That's not what I believe." Man, as you can see, as it is an election year, the polarized sides, these huge differences where, oh, you believe that? Well, I really don't. These social comparisons that are creating chaos and havoc, rather than trying to understand unity and understanding, oh, you're different, but I see because I'm a human too. It doesn't work that way currently. It is very much social comparison to my beliefs. Oh, you don't believe what I believe? And you shove them off or delete them off Facebook or whatever people do nowadays, block them. Okay. All right. So social comparison is pretty much comparing our own beliefs with those of others. Downward social comparison. Okay. So the downward and the upward social comparison, they're going to seem a little confusing. So downward is when we attempt to create a positive image of ourselves through favorable comparison with others who are worse than us. So downward social comparison is you looking down on people, right? Like, I'm better than you. At least I'm not him, right? Like, at least I'm not that guy. And that's just kind of what we do to make ourselves feel better. Well, at least I'm not that guy. You're cleaning the bathrooms, but at least you're not the guy getting sick in the stalls, right? There's always something that we can compare ourselves to make ourselves feel better at some point. And that is called downward. We're looking downward social comparison. Now, upward social comparison is when we compare ourselves with others who are better than we are. Sometimes that's actually good because it gives us this motivation. We look up and go, man, that guy's jumping off buildings. I could do that. I don't suggest it. Parkour is awesome, but you can die, right? Okay. So anyway, we have no one has any idea what I'm talking about here. Upward social comparison. Sometimes we see someone, it could be achievable. That's a goal I want to do. Or sometimes it's the absolute opposite. We look up and go, oh hell no, I'm never going to be that. We kind of get down on ourselves. And again, with the downward social comparison, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. You could go, well, at least I'm not that guy. And other times it's like, I'm better than you, right? So these comparisons, that key word right there, comparing ourselves to others, is how we balance ourselves to figure out where are we, who are we? Are we better? Are we worse? What is this? Can we get better? Could we get worse? These are ways in which we kind of start to develop our identity, okay? All right, so self-presentation. Self-presentation. How do you dress? How do you present yourself to people, right? So the tendency to present a positive self-image, social media, anybody? In fact, if you haven't already, please watch Instagram Famous with JP. So I'm going to pause and let you watch that. Okay, and we're back. All right, so what I love about that video is sometimes he hits the things on the nose. I'm all, oh, done that too. Yeah, I guess that's what I do on social media, right? Just the ways in which we want to present who we are to the world. We don't really show all the things. Lately, my favorite trend is the the reality versus Instagram girls, or like the butt clenchers and the letting their stomachs hang, whether they sit low or pull everything together. I love that because they're really showing you like we're all effing human. It just so happens I had a good angle and the right light, and I took like 100 extra photos just to make sure it was right. Trust me, I do that all the time. I'm like, oh, I like this. No, next. And then I'll take like 100 and I'm like, screw it, I'm not posting anything. I'm over it. Okay, so self-presentation. How are we putting this out for people? And it can be both manipulative and honest. And sometimes both manipulative and honest kind of cross the streams. When we're even talking about positive self-image, sometimes we do that too, right? Where we're like, oh, I'm just like you. My stomach hangs out. But, you're making a shit ton of money on Instagram doing that, right? Because you get more followers or whatever the case is, right? So it's both honest and, manipulative. And that's totally okay. That's your job. That's your life. I ain't judging. In fact, I find you funny, okay? So anyway, so that's our self-presentation. Self-monitoring is changing who we are to fit in. Maybe you didn't get the label you wanted in high school. Maybe you wanted to be the ditzy cheerleader or the cowboy or the whatever. Maybe you wanted to be a part of it and you just couldn't. You weren't really there. So you were monitoring, changing all these things just so you could fit in. Maybe it's your hair. Maybe it's the way you talk. Maybe it's the music you listen to. It has a tendency to be both motivated and capable of regulating our behavior demands based on social situations, right? So it kind of just depends on the situation in which we want to fit in. And self-monitoring isn't terrible. It's not a bad thing. Sometimes we do it to preserve ourselves, right? To be a part of, or to fit in a sense. Like, you go to a really nice fancy party. Are you going to wear t-shirts and jeans and be all, hey, yo, what's up? Or are you going to walk in proper and talk proper, right? Proper, whatever. You know what I mean? Right? So you walk in, you're like, hi, my name is Kylie. Nice to meet you. Right? This is the way we self-monitor in order to acclimate to our situation. Where are we? The way we sit in class, the way we act at work, the way we talk to our bosses, right? And that's another part of that literacy. Reading the room. Always read a room when you walk in, right? And that's just again, all of these things that we talk about are ways in which we fit into society, or we try and fit in to be a part of. And this is not easy. It is not an easy thing. This is what, people try and do to find and understand their identity. So anyway, this is social self. And I want you to take time to really consider, who are you? How are you, downward comparison or upward comparison? Are these good? Are these bad? What is it doing to you as a person? Is it helping? Is it hindering? When you're self-monitoring, are you doing it out of respect? Are you doing it or maybe you're doing the opposite. You know not to walk into this, fancy place wearing the jeans and the, tore up t-shirt, but you do it out of a rebellion. Like, what are these things that you are ultimately doing to understanding who you are and who yourself is? Okay? All right. Next. So, the vocabulary words we're going to go through, that was the vocabulary for the reading. And the reason why I actually give the quiz on that is for you to really understand, like, where are you coming from? Like, why are you doing the things that you do? And the reason why I ask that is because we have a lot of social constructs that are influencing our morals and assumptions about what's right, what's wrong, and who are we, right? What is it that we want to do, and who do we want to be? That's up to you. We're going to try and figure this out through class. And maybe through this class, you'll find something and go, oh shit, that's not who I want to be. Or, ooh, that's what I do want to do. Okay. So first and foremost, all the words that we're going to talk about in this class, don't freak out and be like, oh, I can't believe she used that word. These are definitions in which we are using to understand and define the things in which we do as humans, which majority of the times are pretty shitty, but a lot of times really cool. So we're on a level here where we're adults and we look at these at like a straight, what's the word? Just looking at it, understanding, defining it, and utilizing it. So privilege is one of the first ones. So a privilege, even defined here, is a special right and advantage, or an immunity granted to a particular person or a particular group. Okay, something that you have or that someone else doesn't, but you don't see it. That's the key right there. Privilege is something that you don't see. Okay, and it's especially hard to see if you are not the minority. Okay, and so the reason why I bring this up is a lot of people are like, I don't have privilege, and they will fight it, and it's like, but you do. You just don't see it. And I can't make anybody see their privilege or not. I can explain it. We can talk about it. But it takes a new mindset. Like, I didn't realize my privilege. I grew up in paradise. At some point I was in a mobile home, with like chickens and stuff. And for me, growing up, quote unquote, poor, I'm like, oh, I never had privilege. I had to work for everything. Bullshit. Whether or not that's the case, I am a white, pretty woman, and I will be honest with you, that fucking got me privilege, right? And it took me a long time to see that, and I was like, oh, I'm really embarrassed. I thought it was something else. Privilege doesn't mean how hard you work. That's not what privilege is. Privilege is an immunity and an advantage granted to you based on something that you can't even see it. I couldn't see it. I didn't know until I started really looking at it going, shit, I did. There were things that were granted to me based on my skin color or that I was pretty or whatever the fuck, like those kinds of things. And I have to say these truths in order to be able to address it and to avoid ever saying, I'm not privileged. That's such a bullshit statement for me to ever say. Okay, so I say this so that we can all look at ourselves and go, where am I privileged? Where do I have something that someone else might not have? And I'm just be aware of it is what we're looking for. So like social privilege. Social privilege is the discomfort and defensiveness where we go, how dare you say that I'm privileged? That unfortunately, we have the word white here. It's just kind of, let's be truthful here. It's what a white person would say when confronted about racial inequalities or injustice. And when we say racist, we're not just talking about black people. We are talking about absolutely anybody of minority. Okay, so we have to be honest with ourselves when we talk about this so that we can go, yeah, that's the truth. That is the truth. There is privilege here. And again, social privilege is that defensiveness and the discomfort and the fear of talking about. We cannot do that. We have to be truthful about what we see. It's not a bad thing. You were born into privilege. Some people were not born into not having privilege. These are just the truths of the world in which we live in. But we do have to be honest with ourselves and see it and go, oh shit, I do have it. I do have it. It's not to be guilty about. It's not to feel shame about. It just is. And once you accept it and acknowledge it, then you could go, oh, I see now. And that's all you need to do is to be able to see it. That's all. Okay. That being said, also, we're intersectionality. Kim Crenshaw, she does this great TED Talk. I want you to take a look at that. Okay, so I can pause, and you can go ahead and take a look at it. So her conversation here, let me get my notes real quick. Teacher and I always have notes because I have a lot to say and a lot to think about. So in this video, she obviously talks about affirmative action and the Equal Opportunity Act, so the affirmative action is, I'll just read it. Interconnected nature of social characterizations. Okay, so races and gender, as they apply given to a certain group or an individual. Because of this, there is a disadvantage sometimes, right? Okay, so affirmative action tries to abolish the fact that your gender or your race or whatever gets in the way of your application for any job. Okay, so affirmative action tries to abolish that. Equal Opportunity Act of 1972 gives people more of an opportunity to look past said race, sexuality, and all that stuff in order to get a job. So those two being in effect, Kim here is talking about how there was a company. I totally forgot what it was. It was a packing company. Anyway, whatever. I'll go back to that. Anyway, so there's a company that these people are hiring, and this lady goes to apply for the job, and they do everything except hire her. And she's like, "What is going on?" And she takes a look at it and realizes there's something wrong. The company argues and says, "Well, we've hired black people and we've hired women, so I don't understand what you're talking about." The problem is the black people they are hiring for are workers, right? So they're the working guys, the guys doing the heavy labor work. Well, the women that they are hiring are white secretaries. So there's still this interconnectedness where it's like you're missing the point here. So the judge doesn't see that point and argues against it and says they are hiring both women and people of color. So there's no way that they're going against any of these opportunity acts. Well, they are. Okay, so intersectionality is really talking about, as a black woman, that's the hardest part because they're being overlooked. And it's like, well, we're hiring women and we're hiring people of color, but you see how they're not bringing the two together. Okay, so anyway, watch the video. She does a much better job than I do. I don't have to spend 10 however many minutes discussing it, but I do want you to understand what intersectionality actually is, because the problem was initially there wasn't a word for it, right? So there's race and there's gender, but there wasn't the gender race, if that makes sense, or so that intersectionality. Just watch her. There's a reason why she does a TED Talk, and I'm sitting in my room making a video. Okay. All right. So anyway, there's a reason why those vocabulary words are up there. Next, we're going to talk about patriarchy, right? So it's a system of social or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. So the idea is that men hold power, women do the dishes, okay? So that's kind of the idea of patriarchy. And you can kind of see that, like, why people don't want, a woman for president. There's an intimidation factor there, I'm assuming. I don't know. I can't figure out why there's that fear of a female being in power. I don't really know the science and whatever behind it. If you guys do research reports, you can do it on it. But anyway, so that's patriarchy. That's kind of that is the society we are living in currently, until there is a female president or we get more females in power with equal pay. Remember, we talked about equality. All right. So we're just in that kind of society right now. Okay. All right. So next we talk about misogyny. Okay. And that's the hatred for women. Okay. So the reason why I bring that up is because there is a lot of misogynistic behavior out there that literally creates a hatred for women, like a scary hate. Okay, in fact, you're going to do a reading from the New York Times where they did research, and it turns out mass killers literally have a hatred for women. Screw me, right? Like, all right.